Hi guys, I'm Alan and I'm a digital artist, and today I'll be going through my digital art process from like sketching to finished product. This is like my part 2 kind of video from the video I released earlier. So if you want to get into digital art and you don't know what to buy and what kind of things there are on the market, definitely go watch that video. But let's get started. First things first, let's start off with a sketch. You don't have to do this digitally, you can do this on paper. Sometimes for me, I prefer to just sketch, like get a quick idea down on a little post-it note, and then I just take a picture of it and trace over it digitally. Remember, it's a sketch. Feel free to experiment. You are not locked in an idea just yet. It's always better to kind of like experiment with different compositions, experiment with different kind of like subject lines and whatever backgrounds. So just remember, your sketching is just a way for you to see what's better and what works. So to break down composition, I have a few of these artworks that I've done to show you what my sketch looked like and how the final product goes. And you can see I use like the golden ratio a lot. I use the 3 rules a lot too. Leading lines and triangles are like my main composition kind of techniques. I also like to get mood boards. I know scrolling through Pinterest is very, very addicting. So having a little mood board with my past screenshots of whatever just helps me know what I kind of want to draw. I generally go with like a 3-picture rule where I have 1 picture for the pose, 1 picture for the background, and 1 picture for the lighting reference. And now let's start with canvas size. So canvas size is lovely. There are so many different sizes that people use to draw. Ultimately, it depends on where the artwork is going and what it's used for. Since I do my art knowing that it'll be turned into a print one day, I use A3 as a canvas size. So A3 size is 3508 by 4960. There are some like main aspect ratios you need to be aware of, especially when posting it online. Instagram posting size is 4:5 aspect ratio. In terms of like what the industry uses, 4K is kind of like normal drawing canvas size, is because a lot of landscape are drawn on 4K. Also set your canvas to 300 dpi. So now let's get into sketching again. I like to use a brush that has varied pressure opacity and weight to it too, so I can make my bold lines bold, light lines faint. It's just a really expressive kind of brush to get loose and get my idea down as quick as possible. For this piece, I used a 1-point perspective. I really wanted to show the size of the bathhouse compared to Chihiro and Haku. I think the 1-point perspective with like a low horizon line was really good because you can see the bathhouse towers over the two and it's just a bit of like dynamics and power. Another tip that you can do throughout the drawing is flipping your canvas. So why we do this is because, you know, sometimes we stare at things a bit too much and we get used to what it looks like. So having a different perspective of the same image will help us see mistakes and be like, oh wait, something is a little bit off, and adjust it. So when you're sketching too, for me, I have a kind of painterly background kind of style, so I tend to not sketch detail in, I actually leave it last. So now on a new layer, using either the sketch brush or a line art brush, you can go over the sketch and make sure you have smooth line, confident lines. You can vary the line weight, which is probably ideal, but I like to just go over it. My line weight kind of control isn't the best, and so I tend to like redo lines to make it bolder. Remember, using your arm to do like smooth, continuous kind of strokes rather than tiny wrist line arts. It creates a lot bolder, confident lines and smoother lines rather than chitty kind of petting lines. Also, it really depends on your art style if you want to do line art. Some people just paint over the sketch and refine it. That's completely fine, but just bear in mind, you kind of need to understand what needs to be refined and what needs to be more expressive. And that just takes a bit of time and knowing style and taste. So having a character be the subject is a lot refined than, I don't know, flowers that can just be really expressive and have no really line art, just petals everywhere. Remember, you can use the inbuilt features like the symmetry tools. You can use like the pen tools where you can click specific points to make it curvy and control where the curves look like. That way you might have more control over your line art too, and it just saves a bit of time. What needs to be organic, you know, use your hand, and what needs to be quite strict and straight, use the tools provided. Now that we have our line art or refined sketch done, now we can create another layer and use clipping masks to paint over them. So you want to create a couple layers for the colors. Maybe you put it in a folder. So I like to organize my color layers as background, middle ground, and foreground, you know. So basically background and subject and whatever goes in between. For me, I use the lasso tool to go around it, and then I fill it in with gray and then I just paint over it. This is called like alpha locking. So using a different layer, you can alpha lock it and then you can just paint over it like amazingly. You know, you don't have to worry about it going over the lines. You can use this for your line art too to color it. Now that you've finished your line art and your base colors, it's time to start rendering. Now, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't really have kind of like a definite definition. People just use it just to say like, oh, coloring process, to make it all nice and somewhat realistic depending on what kind of art style you have. Rendering could mean adding shadows, adding highlights, adding effects, making it smoother, gradients, whatever. So I like to do is I start off with my shadows, and I like to do this by doodling a little sun path to know where the sun shines and where it bounces off. So in this case, the sun is here and then a lot of the shadows will face this way. And I would use colors like purple and blue, change the layer effect to like multiply and the opacity down, just blur it in to create shadows, things like that. And just be aware that color is really difficult to understand. It takes a while, takes skill, takes a lot of studying. So, you know, do your best. You can simple it down by just focusing on a few colors, especially look at the color wheels, what kind of color combination you're going to use, where it could be contrasting colors, complementary colors. And for me, I kind of just use a saturated kind of color palette anyway. I love a bit of saturation, a bit too much. I'm gonna work on that, but yeah. Key thing to note as well, especially during the coloring stage, is do not zoom in, guys. The beginning of your art process, you should not zoom in. It is like illegal to, don't. The reason why is because you don't want to focus on detail in the first bit of your drawing. You want to focus on detail last, where it's important. That way you know what things you need to include and what can be left as simplified, expressive. Remember, try and achieve 80% of the work by 20% of effort. So bigger size brushes. And this kind of like leads me to my next tip, is using different brushes. So as much as I love, you know, the round brush with like the opacity and everything, it doesn't create kind of like textured lines, and you don't want to do that manually too. So having brushes that will save you a bunch of time for detailing and textures will just make the process a lot quicker and also more enjoyable. Personally, I like to use the gouache brush. I have a few textured brushes that I use in pretty much all my paintings, where it gives a textured painterly style. It's also important not to overdo the brushes because you don't want to have too many overstimulating kind of things. For example, these brushes that I use are perfect for the bathhouse. It creates this little grit texture that just shows the paint strokes and everything, and it's really nice. Another tip I suggest you do midway is to check your color values, and you can do this by creating a new layer on top, coloring it black and having it as a color overlay or something like that. And this will allow you to see your colors in black and white. Why is this important? Color values are so important to show what the subject is, show how far places are, and so the background will be lighter in the color values and the front things will be darker. And it just helps to make sure your subject doesn't blend into the background. You can adjust the hues and colors by simple tools like Control U, like the color variation, and just tone it down a bit if it's too distracting. Another tip is that you want to focus on big to small. So especially like buildings, you want to focus on the bigger picture and then slowly chip down into the finer details. This is kind of what I did for the windows. I just do a big rectangle of blue, then I added the window frames, and then I added the little grids and the little reflections. And that's just how to be a lot more efficient in your art process rather than doing detail all at once. So we are finally kind of like 80% done, let's say. We have 20% left of just detail and whatnot. Remember, not everything needs to be super highly over-rendered. Sometimes having a more simplified style is a lot more expressive than having a very strict kind of clean looking render. So now that you've kind of finished, you just have a few adjustments to tweak. And I feel like this is kind of the best part, you know, and this is like text, highlights, and color correction. So I like to go on Photoshop to do my text, and I just, you know, add whatever I need to, and I prefer to use Photoshop because of like the graphic design kind of tools that they have. A lot of warping that I can do, which is great. I also use Camera Raw to color correct my images. I sometimes use Gaussian blur and like all the effects to create kind of more in-depth pieces. For this piece, not really. I just color corrected it, added some grain and a little bit of vignette to have the focus, but really, I didn't want to add too much kind of blur or anything like that, just because I wanted this to be a little bit more flat than usual. Now, with color correcting, it's really difficult to kind of get right and balance. And what I tend to do is boost the saturation a little bit further. But yeah, that is really it. That's my art process from start to finish. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new and something that can help you in creating digital art. If you really like this video, please, comment, like, subscribe, anything that helps. And if you are interested, check out my shop where I have my stickers available. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments and I'll do my best to answer